The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, but that wasn't why Sarah Chen was crying in the hospital parking lot at 2 in the morning. She was crying because she had exactly $17 in her checking account, a daughter who needed surgery she couldn't afford, and a heart that was simultaneously breaking and refusing to give up. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel of her 15-year-old Honda, the same car that had carried her through nursing school, through her divorce, through every impossible moment that had led her here. And in that moment of absolute desperation, she whispered the same prayer she'd been whispering for weeks. Please, just show me what to do. What Sarah didn't know was that her prayer had already been answered 4 hours earlier by a woman she'd never met. Her name was Margaret Holloway, though everyone at Mercy General called her Maggie. At 73, she still volunteered in the children's ward every Tuesday and Thursday, had done so for 22 years, ever since her own daughter had been treated there for leukemia. Her daughter had survived. Maggie never forgot that gift, and she spent 2 decades trying to pay it forward, one crayon drawing and bedside story at a time. That evening, Maggie had been reading to a 6-year-old named Emma, Sarah's daughter, when she noticed the little girl's mother wasn't there. The nurse explained quietly that Sarah was working a double shift at the diner across town, trying to scrape together money for the upcoming surgery. Emma had a congenital heart defect that had worsened, and without the procedure, the doctors gave her 6 months. With it, she could live a normal life. Maggie had simply nodded, finished the story, kissed Emma's forehead, and left. But she didn't go home. Instead, she drove to her bank, then to her lawyer's office where she'd called ahead, and by midnight, she'd set something in motion that would change everything. She didn't tell anyone. She never did. Sarah discovered it the next morning when the hospital administrator, a stern woman named Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, called her into her office. Sarah's hands were shaking as she sat down, certain they were going to tell her that Emma's condition had worsened. That time had run out. Instead, Dr. Okonkwo slid a folder across the desk. Your daughter's surgery has been paid for, in full. Sarah stared at the words on the paper, but they wouldn't make sense. I don't understand. There must be a mistake. No mistake. An anonymous donor came forward last night. The surgery is scheduled for Friday. Who? Sarah's voice cracked. I need to thank them. I need to... They wish to remain anonymous. Those were their explicit instructions. Dr. Okonkwo's expression softened, just slightly. Accept the gift, Ms. Chen. Your daughter needs you focused on her recovery, not on paying bills. Sarah stumbled out of that office and directly into the hospital chapel, where she sobbed so hard that a janitor came to check if she was all right. She wasn't all right. She was shattered and whole at the same time, destroyed by gratitude, rebuilt by grace. Emma's surgery went perfectly. 3 days later, she was sitting up in bed, her color already better, her smile brighter than Sarah had seen in months. And that's when Maggie came for her usual volunteer shift. Sarah was there, reading to Emma, when the older woman walked in with her cart of books and stuffed animals. Their eyes met and something passed between them, some wordless recognition that Sarah couldn't quite name. Maggie simply smiled and asked if they'd like a story. Please, Emma said, and Maggie settled into the chair and began to read. Over the next 2 weeks, as Emma recovered, Maggie visited every shift. She and Sarah started talking, carefully at first, then with growing warmth. Sarah learned that Maggie had been a teacher, that she'd lost her husband 5 years ago, that she had 3 grandchildren she adored. Maggie learned that Sarah was studying for her nursing degree at night, that she'd grown up in foster care, that she'd never known what family was supposed to feel like until Emma was born. They never spoke about the money. Sarah had her suspicions, especially when she noticed that Maggie stopped coming around. The time the bill was paid, then returned right after. But she couldn't be sure, and Maggie's warm but private demeanor made it clear that some questions weren't meant to be asked. Emma was discharged on a Tuesday. Sarah took her home to their small apartment. And for the first time in a year, she felt like she could breathe. That evening, after Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat at her kitchen table and wrote a letter. She didn't know who would read it, but she needed to write it anyway. To the person who saved my daughter's life, she began. And the words poured out, everything she'd been holding inside. The fear, the gratitude, the promise that she would spend the Rest of her life trying to be worthy of such kindness. She sealed it, addressed it to anonymous donor, CEO Mercy General Hospital, and mailed it the next day. Maggie received it a week later, forwarded by the hospital administrator who knew the truth. She read it in her kitchen, tears streaming down her weathered face. And then she folded it carefully and placed it in a box with 47 other letters, cards, and notes from people she'd helped over the years. People who never knew her name but whose lives she'd touched. With the inheritance her husband had left her, money she'd decided long ago would do more good in the world than in her bank account. But the story doesn't end there. It never really ends. 5 years passed. Emma grew strong and healthy. A vivacious 11-year-old who loved soccer and science and asked too many questions. Sarah finished nursing school and got hired at Mercy General, working in the same children's ward where her daughter had been saved. And Maggie kept volunteering, though her steps were slower now, her visits shorter. Then came the day when Maggie didn't show up for her shift. Sarah noticed immediately, asked around, and learned that Maggie had collapsed at home and been admitted to the cardiac unit. Sarah's heart seized. She finished her shift, checked on Emma at her friend's house, and went upstairs. Maggie was awake but weak, hooked up to monitors, her skin paper-thin and pale. She smiled when Sarah walked in. "There's my girl," Maggie whispered. "Don't you dare," Sarah said, pulling a chair close and taking Maggie's hand. "Don't you dare give up!" "I'm not giving up, honey. I'm just tired." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Sarah said the thing she'd been holding back for 5 years. "It was you, wasn't it? You paid for Emma's surgery." Maggie's eyes crinkled, but she didn't deny it. "Does it matter?" "It matters everything. You gave her life. You gave me hope when I had nothing left." "No," Maggie said firmly, squeezing Sarah's hand with surprising strength. "You had everything left. You had love. You had courage. You had a daughter worth fighting for. I just helped clear the path a little." "Why?" Sarah's voice broke. "Why would you do that for strangers?" Maggie was quiet for a long moment, her eyes drifting to the window where the sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Because someone did it for me once. When my daughter was sick, when I was where you were, terrified and alone, someone helped us. They never told me their name either. And when I tried to pay them back, they said, 'Don't pay me back. Pay it forward.'" She looked back at Sarah, her eyes bright despite her exhaustion. "So that's what I've been doing, paying it forward. And now it's your turn." Sarah shook her head, tears streaming. "I'm just a nurse. I don't have—" "You have everything that matters. You have a heart that knows what it's like to hurt. Use it. Help someone else when the moment comes. That's all I ask. That's all any of us can do." Maggie stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks. And Sarah was there every day, often with Emma, who would read to Maggie the same stories Maggie had once read to her. The older woman improved slowly, stubbornly, and when she was finally discharged, Sarah and Emma were there to take her home. At Maggie's door, the older woman hugged them both. "Thank you," she said, "for reminding me why I did any of it, for showing me that love comes back around." 2 years later, Sarah was working the night shift when a young mother came in with her son, a boy about 8 with the same look of desperate hope Emma had once worn. The mother's hands were shaking as she filled out paperwork, and Sarah noticed she checked the box for self-pay, with a financial assistance application attached. Sarah watched her for a moment, saw herself in that fear, and made a decision. She pulled out her phone and made 3 calls, to her bank, to the hospital foundation, and to a fund she'd been contributing to every month for years. A fund she'd named the Forward Fund, in honor of a woman who'd taught her what grace looked like. She couldn't pay for everything. She wasn't Maggie, didn't have those resources, but she could cover half. She could make the impossible slightly more possible. She could clear the path just a little. When she told the mother an hour later that a donor had come forward, the woman's face crumpled exactly the way Sarah's had, and Sarah held her while she cried, understanding in her bones what Maggie had known all along, that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about moments like this, human to human, heart to heart. That night after her shift, Sarah drove to the cemetery where Maggie had been buried 6 months earlier, a loss that still ached. She sat by the headstone and told her about the boy, about the mother, about the choice she'd made, I'm paying it forward, she whispered. Just like you asked. Just like someone asked you. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of jasmine and rain, and for just a moment, Sarah could have sworn she heard Maggie's laugh, warm and full of light, reminding her that kindness never really ends. It just changes hands, generation to generation, stranger to stranger, one small miracle at a time. And somewhere across town, Emma was falling asleep, dreaming of becoming a doctor, of saving lives, of carrying forward a legacy she didn't fully understand yet but felt in her bones. A legacy that started with her because someone once loved a stranger enough to show her what humanity really means. Pay it forward. Always forward. Because in the end, that's the only direction that matters.